Jim Chapman, welcome back to the LoVasco briefing. This is our fourth podcast in a series of a number of podcasts we've been doing. And if we backtrack a little bit, we've been talking about fiduciary responsibility, governance gaps, benchmarking, documentation, all the things that plan sponsors should be evaluating.
Yep.
Today, actually, I want to talk a little bit about something a little bit more practical.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when a plan sponsor realizes that something just isn't right, but they still don't make a change?
Yeah. This is probably one of the more important factors that we're going to discuss, but this is one of those situations where there can actually be more scrutiny when you know something's wrong, but you choose not to take action on it. It's actually something that we run into maybe more often than some may think with clients or prospects, and something I'm excited to dive a bit deeper into.
At what point do they realize that their current arrangement might not be serving them well?
I think probably the most obvious one would be Department of Labor notice or audit would tip them off, but sometimes it could be something as simple as having a conversation with a friend at a different organization. They're sharing some of the things that they're doing on their retirement program. Or sometimes it can just be like a slow drip of small operational or plan issues or errors that become something much larger. The analogy of death by 1,000 paper cuts, where you slowly realize that you may have some potential issues that it's finally time to address.
Yeah. How often do you see organizations that they know they've got a problem, but they don't do anything?
I think I see it a little more often than people may think. And I think it generally boils down to two common items. The first one is relationships. Relationships are deep. People generally don't like to disrupt relationships. And a lot of times, if we're talking about replacing an advisor, bringing someone like us on board, oftentimes an objection may be, we have a really deep relationship, so I don't want to ruffle feathers. And so they choose not to take action because they don't want to alter an existing relationship. The other item is maybe a misconception of what's actually involved in making change. They think it's going to be some big disruptive project that is going to take up a lot of time, disrupt their employee base. And again, a lot of times the individuals that we're dealing with at companies are awesome, but they're your executives, your HR folks, and they have a number of objectives on their plate, and on that priority list, maybe the 401k plan is item 15 out of 20. And so sometimes it just doesn't make it up to the top of their priority list. I think there may be a lot of work involved and they want to focus their priorities elsewhere. I think those two would probably be what stand out most when I think of objections.
Yeah, there's a human tendency to just stick with the status quo and not have to address the changes that might be made.
Yep.
And sometimes it can be a bit of an unknown around what changes need to be made.
Yep.
So ultimately, what is the real risk of them saying, we'll deal with this later?
I think there's a few risks involved here. There's guidance from the DOL, and it talks about the concept of when you know something and choose not to take action, that in itself is a decision, like the decision to decide not to do something. That can bring more scrutiny than ignorance, because you know that there's potential issues. You know that your 401k plan has gaps, and you're making the choice to ignore those or not address those, and ultimately choosing not to act in the best interest of your employees. Choosing not to take action can, frankly, expose people to a higher level of fiduciary risk than they would like to have. And I think the other component, too, is a lot of times when you choose not to address errors, you're generally going to continue to see small matters pop up that may result in something much larger. For example, a client now that's been a client for a number of years, we had a very long sales process with this now client. It was one of those situations where they wanted to hire us. They were under the impression there would be a big heavy lift to bring us on board. They had a few operational items come up around payroll processing and how rehires are being treated within their record keeping and administration system, led to some penalties and actual costs for them. We were ultimately brought on board as the advisor. We were able to get involved and help clean up some of the processes around the administration side of their 401k. For them, it took facing penalties and fees associated with those penalties to ultimately opt to retain an organization like LoVasco to come in, clean things up, and get the plan on the right track.
Jim, you alluded to the fact that if I hire a consultant or an advisor, there's going to be a heavy lift in onboarding that. Help me diffuse that a little bit. Talk a little bit about the process of if someone does hire a consultant, what is the change and what does that process look like?
Yeah. I think the common misconception is when I change my advisor consultant, then that automatically means I have to go through a record keeping and administration change, or they're going to come in and bring in their favored vendors. And that's not the reality of the situation. Very simply, in order to engage a new advisor consultant like LoVasco, it's usually two signatures, one on what's called the advisor of record form and another on the investment advisory agreement. Once those two documents are signed, we are engaged as the plan's new advisor. And typically after that, we'll also hold one meeting. We call it our onboarding meeting. During that conversation, we're just going to talk about the key priorities and objectives of the plan sponsor and what actions and priorities are we going to place to address some of the issues that we've identified in the early conversations with them. And from there, we get to work to start cleaning up the plan.
Yeah, and really it's from a strategic planning perspective, during that onboarding, we're talking about the things that maybe we identified early in the discovery process, but also just some of their future aspirations.
Exactly.
Just set the bar of where we want this plan to be in 30, 60, 90, maybe even going out 3 years of what we want to do, and decide what changes should be made at what times. Do we want to rip the Band-Aid off and make all these changes at once because there's capacity to handle that? Or do we shift them over time? Yeah. And again, one of the key misconceptions is that when you change consultants, that means you've got to change everything.
Yeah.
How often is that actually true?
I would say more often than not, that's not the case. We're able to come in and put in the proper governance process, put in the proper processes and procedures. We'll implement a proper committee charter, investment policy statement. We'll begin documenting meeting minutes and building this fiduciary file. And I think the common misconception around the record keeping administration change is that this is going to have a big impact on our employees. And that's also, frankly, not the case. A lot of times when we're added as the advisor, employees don't have to change anything with their account. They're going to have the same username and password to access their accounts because we're not changing the record keeping system most of the time. If we are making investment changes, we're likely doing so in a way that's very non-invasive for employees. We're either going to use like a like fund mapping strategy or we're going to use a very specific and qualified, what we call default investment, to make sure that employees are aligned in the correct investment options. Our goal is to make it very smooth and seamless, but more often than not, we're making this very hands-off for the plan sponsor. We're trying to, again, bring them a list of, hey, here are ideas, here's what we can plan for the future, we're going to get to work for you. We're trying to make this very smooth from the participant's perspective, just to make this a win-win for everyone involved.
Yeah, technically, if we're acting in the best interest of plan participants through a transition like that, the default option for the transition is going to be in their best interest, right? So they're not going to have to make a decision. And if they were defaulted in anything, it would be a prudent choice for them. Jim, talk a little bit more about just how you help organizations create a governance process without creating a ton of chaos internally. We alluded to this a little bit on the onboarding and strategic planning, but how does that work?
Yeah, I think to summarize it very simply, we try to take ownership of creating the documents, creating the structure, and then bringing those documents and that process to our clients to make it really easy for them to deploy. What does that mean? It starts with, we'll help draft the actual committee charter that companies are going to adopt. We'll help draft the investment policy statement. We will create this framework of when we're going to meet, whether that's going to be a quarterly or a semi-annual basis. We have what we call the fiduciary checklist, where every year we're going to review a checklist and make sure that we're hitting all of our fiduciary responsibilities. In January, when we're meeting to review our prior year, we can look at this and say, hey, we can check the box. We went through a benchmarking exercise to evaluate our service providers. We met on a quarterly basis to review our investment options versus our investment policy statement criteria. We did a share class audit last year. We documented meeting minutes, and we save all of this in the fiduciary file. And so we try to take ownership of that. We don't try to put that burden on our clients. And so again, what the ask for from our clients is really two items. Review the fiduciary documents in the beginning to make sure that we're all on the same page for what our responsibilities are going to be as a committee, and then show up and be engaged in the decision-making process when we meet, and we're going to document those meeting minutes. with the deliberation process and the rationale and save that in the fiduciary file for them to start building that paper trail.
Right. So, Jim, if a plan sponsor decided to improve their governance model and started today, what would it look like 90 days later?
Yeah. So waving a magic wand, everything goes as we like. We get great engagement. We're going to have the committee charter in place. We're going to have the IPS in place. We're going to have documented meeting minutes. We're going to have gone through investment reviews. We're going to have gone through our benchmarking exercises, our share class audits. We're going to have reviewed an operational audit of the plan. We'll have gone through a fiduciary calendar check. We'll have all of this documented in the fiduciary file so they have something very process-oriented, defined, and then defensible in the case of a potential lawsuit or a DOL audit.
Looking out 90 days afterwards, what changes psychologically for the committee or the leadership team after this governance process is installed?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is they just have a sense of relief that someone is handling it. And it's one of those things where for us, 401ks are exciting. It's what we do. But for most of our clients, this, again, is not their core competency. It's not always the top priority for them. And sometimes it can be this nagging item in the background that exposes them to risk, and they're not exactly sure if they're managing this correctly or if they're doing it right. And oftentimes, 90 days out, when they can see the processes in place, we have a clean fiduciary file, and they have someone who's taking extreme ownership of all of this. It just gives them a sigh of relief, clarity, and really allows them to focus on what their top priorities are.
So, Jim, we've had a series of 4 podcasts that we've gone through on this particular topic. What is the biggest misconception that you hope that plan sponsors have just debunked after all this conversation?
I would say that maybe doing the basics or the minimum probably isn't quite enough. What I mean by that is if you're just filing your 5500, completing compliance testing, and taking a look at the generic investment review that's produced by your record-keeping provider once a year, that's probably not enough. You really want to make sure that you have a formal, documented process in place to go about your fiduciary responsibilities. And again, I would just encourage people to take a look at what their fiduciary file looks like right now, if they have a documented process in place. And if they're questioning that, then that may be a nudge to take a deeper look.
Jim, we're hosting a fiduciary governance training coming up here at the end of June. It's actually June 29th at 1 p.m. Why are we doing this, and who's it for?
Yeah, I think we're doing it for anyone who's sitting there wondering, do I have the proper fiduciary process in place? Someone who wants to learn more. And really, it's for anyone who has any responsibility or ownership of the retirement program at their organization. And I'm personally excited about the training. I feel like this podcast, you've been like holding Chris and I off with one arm about diving deeper into the weeds. And I think we did a good job of scratching the surface with this podcast. But I think that fiduciary training is going to go a little bit deeper. It's going to talk a little bit more about exactly how we would go about doing some of these specific actions that we've discussed high level here. And it's also going to talk about responsibilities that fall on the plan sponsor's plate and some tips and takeaways that they can implement internally as well in the interim. Maybe anyone can tune in. You don't have to be someone touching the retirement program, but I think anyone who sits on that in that chair internally would get a lot of value out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be clear, Jim, is this going to be a pitch for LoVasco's services, or is this going to be something else?
Yeah, not going to be a pitch for LoVasco's services. This is going to be educational. I think the analogy that we've used internally a little bit is this is going to be pure educational. Frankly, we're going to tell people exactly how they can implement their own fiduciary governance process. Just a matter if they want to do that by themselves. The analogy is like, heck, I'm doing it right now. I had a guy come over and give me a quote from some landscaping work in my backyard. He told me exactly what I needed to do and how to do it, what I needed, and told me I could do it by myself. But the reality is I'm not very handy, and I don't necessarily want to do it by myself. He probably knew that. And so we're kind of taking the same approach. We're going to give everyone the playbook of how they can implement a fiduciary governance process. They could take that away, find value in it, but the hope is that they seek a great fiduciary consultant like LoVasco to help them fulfill those needs.
All right, Jim, thank you for joining the LoVasco podcast. specifically talking about fiduciary governance. We do look forward to hosting our fiduciary governance training coming up here in June 29th to be exact, 1 p.m. We encourage listeners to tune in. There will be a recording of the session as well, so if you can't attend live, then still sign up. We'll make sure to get you the recording. But again, Jim, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. Appreciate it.